So it has been a mere 21 days since Strava filed their massive lawsuit against Garmin, alleging patent infringement in two core areas, one being around heat maps and routing, and another one being around Strava segments. And with that, Strava requests that Garmin basically be forced to halt sales of all devices that had the infringing components in it, which is pretty much every watch that Garmin makes, as well as all of their bike computers. Now, during the 21 days, there has been all sorts of interesting discussions, but probably the most interesting discussion, the starting point for discussion, if you will, was Strava themselves. Less than a day after making all these legal filings, one of their chief technology officers went to Reddit on the Strava subreddit and basically did a drunk uncle post about how this had nothing to do with these patents at all and everything to do with Garmin's request or change to their API that requires their API partners, so that can be Strava and Training Peaks and now Meta and you name it, to go ahead and declare the source of the data. In the same way that you would see the source of the data at the bottom of a map showing where that data came from. Of course, that post did not go over well in Reddit or the rest of the world. Maybe because the dude was wrong. Like, he was wrong on the only two things he talked about. Number one, he talked about the fact that the attribution would require logos. It didn't require logos. It was only a one-page document explaining how to do this, and he still got it wrong. And number two, more importantly than that, they invoked the "it is your data, not Strava's data" argument. Something that just a year prior, they tried to tell the world it was Strava's data and not your data. And that is actually what kicked off this entire fiasco to begin with, was Garmin basically saying, actually, it's not your data, Strava. This data came from Garmin, and thus you must attribute it. Now, all that background said, here's the kicker. Strava today walked into the court and said, yeah, our bad, we're dismissing this case. They are voluntarily dismissing the case against Garmin. There is a mere one-line filing that says we are voluntarily dismissing the case without prejudice. That simply means that they could file the case down the road if they wanted to again, but it's pretty clear that's not going to happen. And the reason why it's probably not going to happen gets to why they probably dismissed the case to begin with. This was an incredibly high-risk case and high-risk scenario for Strava. First off, you had two patents that they were trying to say that Garmin infringed against. Strava's patent portfolio, at least according to PTO, the Patent Trademark Office, is only about 20 patents. Now, there could be different filings under different titles of company titles and stuff like that, so it's probably bigger than that. But for reference, Garmin's official listing is well over 1,000 patents, and it's almost certain that Strava has infringed on some other Garmin patent somewhere that Garmin could basically countersue for. And obviously, Garmin's bucket was much bigger than Strava's little bucket of patents to countersue for. But more than that, when it came to Strava's actual paying customers, the people that do put money in their pockets, like myself, I have a premium Strava or a paid Strava account, the majority of those people are coming from Garmin. It's as simple as that. The majority of those users are Garmin users, that data then comes from the Garmin platform and syncs over to Strava. And should Garmin have decided to turn off that API connection from Garmin to Strava, that's where all your workouts go to Strava, that would have pretty much killed Strava overnight. Within a matter of days, Strava likely would have gone out of business. That's how important that connection is to Strava. So the fact that Strava would even file this lawsuit to their biggest and closest partner for the last decade and a half is mind-boggling. Even more so when you consider the fact that Garmin virtually never loses patent infringement lawsuits. They get a lot of companies, patent trolls and otherwise, that will go ahead and file lawsuits against Garmin, and it happens constantly, but Garmin virtually never loses those lawsuits. And that probably should have been a signal to maybe not poke the bear. But even more relevant to all this is that mere 10 days prior to Strava suing Garmin, Sunnto, yes, watchmaker Sunnto, actually sued Garmin first for patent infringement on roughly half a dozen different patents, including some golf stuff and a whole bunch of random things, super random things. Now, that patent case is much different than the Strava one for a whole lot of reasons. That case reads much more like a money grab than Strava's. Strava was more they were upset about something, versus Sunnto's case is more of a money thing. And the nuances of the Sunnto Garmin case and the nuances of the Sunnto case are actually much more technical, and there's a different understanding of some of the hardware design elements like antenna design and things like that is much harder for me to judge from the outside as to who is right and who is wrong. But I would argue that these two companies have got along for a long, long time, and it's only to their recent owner coming in, a Chinese company that came in and bought Sunnto, they've decided to make this move. But that's something getting off track, except we then step back and look at it and go, now you have two companies suing Garmin over patent infringement, both looking for potentially a payday. How will Garmin respond? And the answer in the case of Garmin was, as one insider put it, not to blink. Garmin wasn't going to blink here. And I suspect I would have loved to be a fly on the wall of the conversation when those two sides met. And I suspect it was a very one-way conversation where Garmin explained to Strava how they were about to entirely disembody and effectively put Strava out of business legally if Strava didn't drop that lawsuit. Because the number of ways that Garmin could make and can make Strava hurt far outnumbers the number of ways that Strava can make Garmin hurt. And ultimately, that ends with this one-line document right there saying they're voluntarily dismissing the lawsuit. The bigger question then is, what happens next? And in kind of like two core areas. First off is that partnership between Strava and Garmin. That had been incredibly close over the years. There's no other company that I'm aware of from a Garmin standpoint that was closer than Strava. Garmin basically launched all the new features when it came to things like Strava Live segments and beacon integration, a gazillion other things. It was always Strava first. That relationship now isn't just burning the bridge, it's burning the entire city around the bridge. So much so that we saw just a week after this lawsuit was announced that Garmin then partnered with Komoot for even closer integration, so that when you set up a new Garmin Edge device, it automatically recommends that you set up a Komoot account instead. Strava never had that level of integration at all, and now we see Garmin offering it to Komoot. And then you get to the next piece, which is what happens to the executive team at Strava. There's been some that have said that this was all a bit of a ruse to go ahead and draw attention to the IPO, and that, hey, all press is good press. But that doesn't really make sense to me, because in this case, the press that was focused on this was incredibly negative, and negative from a business standpoint. It was pointing out the fact this was incredibly high risk with incredibly low reward, and could have been absolutely catastrophic for Strava had Garmin decided to play even harder ball. As a result, if you're looking at this upcoming IPO that Strava's confirmed they're having here, I'd be saying, is this really the executive team that you want to lead that IPO? The same team that is going to make these super high risk but low reward type decisions doesn't seem like the executive team that you want. And that sets aside the entire Reddit Drunk Uncle post as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the coming weeks if there is a change in the executive team. And keeping in mind the CEO there is new, only been there about a year or so ago. And while I agree with many of his product-focused things, almost every single one of his policy-focused things has been a complete and total dumpster fire. Sadly, as you can see, I'm traveling this week, so I don't have my dumpster fire t-shirt with me. But if I did, I'd be wearing it right now. With that, thanks for watching. Have a good one.